You're always going to be missing part of the story. The important part is knowing what your blind spots are.
If that famous quote was better the devil you know that you don't know, that would fit this situation perfectly.
This is the B2B Performance Marketing Podcast by Webmarketer, here to help you make the right moves with your B2B advertising. No spin, no smoke and mirrors, just honest insights from the advertising front line.
Welcome back to the B2B Performance Marketing Podcast. I'm Maelien from Webmarketer.
And I'm Louis Holton Davis, also from Webmarketer.
If you've ever wondered why your CRM, Google Analytics, and your ads all show different lead counts from different lead sources, you're not alone. Today, we're going to be tackling the confusing world of multi-channel attribution. I know it's a total nightmare to explain the numbers to stakeholders when they just don't make any sense. So we're going to be exploring why the numbers don't add up and what you can do about it.
Now, before we dive in fully, I want to talk through a bit of a mental model that we use with our clients. This is really going to help to frame everything we're talking about today. I like to split conversions out into two separate types. So the first one is direct conversions and the second one is influenced conversions. So let's start with direct conversions. These are what you're going to see in your CRM and in your Google Analytics. Now, direct conversions are usually underreported because they only count that last touch before someone converts, and we know that there's a whole journey before someone becomes a lead. And then influenced conversions are what you're going to see in the ad platforms themselves. Now, on the flip side, influenced conversions are typically overreported because they count anyone who viewed or clicked on an ad, regardless of whether that ad was their last interaction or if they converted through a completely different channel. Think of it like this. A direct conversion only counts the session where a user became a lead, and an influenced conversion counts every touch point along the way for each individual channel. Both are just as important as each other, but they tell us different things and they have completely different use cases. The only way that these conversion types would tell us a complete and perfect truth would be that if every single user learned about the business, clicked on a piece of marketing, whether that's organic, social, or an ad or whatever, visited the website, became a lead, and did that all in one session. As marketers, we know that that pretty much never happens, and there's this big and complex journey that happens before.
Now that we've introduced the what, let's run through the why. Here's a whistle-stop tour of each of the different data types that you could be reporting on and why we should be taking each with a pinch of salt. We're going to be talking about CRMs, Google Analytics, ad platforms, third-party attribution software, and user-reported data. Now, your CRM relies on last touch attribution, and that means it only measures the last step before someone became a lead, and essentially it ignores everything else that happened before this. Google Analytics uses data-driven attribution by default to say where the lead came from. This means it shows the single most influential traffic source that generated the lead. Ad platforms like Google and LinkedIn will claim everyone that engaged with ads before becoming a lead, whether that was the first step, the last step, or even somewhere in the middle. These platforms can't see what happened on other channels, and this means they're not going to be able to deduplicate any leads that also engaged somewhere else. Attribution software lets you choose the type of attribution model that you want to use, so how you want the leads to be attributed to each marketing channel. First touch, last touch, linear, that kind of thing. It's incredibly powerful. The downside here is it only starts measuring once someone hits your website. So yet again, we're missing a chunk of that journey. User-reported attribution. So usually this is a field in your form that asks, where did you hear about us from? In reality, this is going to measure a mix of different attributions because it relies on A, what a user remembers, and B, their general digital marketing knowledge. So what was the last branded touch point that they remember interacting or engaging with? And will this be reported as Google or LinkedIn? Or will it be reported as Google paid ads or LinkedIn paid ads? Or will they just not know or not remember and put something arbitrary? So there's really a lot to consider here when comparing the numbers. It's almost as if you've got 6 different people trying to tell you the same story. They're all going to be correct as far as they know, but different people are going to include different bits of detail or focus on different parts of the story. Just like these reports, they're going to be really insightful, but each of them is going to measure a different part of the customer journey. And this is something that we really need to consider when we're running through and crunching those numbers. Now, it's only human to instinctively trust numbers, but as we've said on other episodes, marketing data can be subjective. And that's why we like to use the phrase data story.
So let's try and put this into a bit of real-world perspective with a hypothetical question. So something like, why are your ads reports showing me 50 leads this month when we're only seeing 40 in our CRM? It's a valid question, right? And it could very well be one that you've asked yourself before. The truth is that it can look a little bit shady, like someone's maybe trying to pull the wool over your eyes. But let's take a look at why this happens. So we know that the CRM only takes last touch conversions into consideration, and it doesn't allow for the broader influence of other marketing channels. But then on the other hand, it creates this big disparity between the data in your ad accounts and your CRM. Now, it's true, you could just go and put attribution software in place and it will stop that double counting. What a lot of businesses do, and it's a valid approach. But I think we really need to understand the challenge before looking to a solution. Ideally, we want to go through the why and the how rather than jumping to the what too quickly. And that's what we're really trying to do with you today.
Unfortunately, that situation you just covered is one that happens all too often. And it's really important here to hammer home that perfect attribution just doesn't exist. It's also really unlikely that it ever will, for a number of reasons. Customer journeys are really complex, especially in B2B. Google's latest research shows that it takes 11 points across 4 different channels before someone ultimately converts. And as we've already highlighted here, there's not a single reporting platform that's going to be able to cover all of that. And I think as marketers, we have to ask ourselves a really big question. When we know that there are multiple touch points and multiple channels that we go through before becoming a lead, why are we so obsessed with finding the one touch point and the one channel that resulted in that lead? Why do we need that single source of truth?
It's such a good question. And I also think that as marketers, we have this bias where when we're presented with something clean and impressive versus something messy but effective, we're going to choose the pretty option every time. The problem here is we're talking about the customer journey, which is extremely messy by default. I mean, they call it the messy middle for a reason. It often feels like we naturally know that the customer journey and conversion attribution are part of the same thing in our day-to-day, but then we kind of forget this when it comes to the reporting. It's like we have this tunnel vision where we're looking at the bottom of the funnel and we're treating that like the full picture. And that's really my problem with attribution, or at least with how it's used anyway. Now, our friends over at Funnelytics, they talk about this concept of contribution over attribution. And for me, that really hits the nail on the head. So let me talk about contribution for a minute. And I've gone a little abstract with this definition, but I promise there's a point coming. If we think about Google Analytics, there's really 2 top-level scopes of data, which are users and sessions. One user can visit a website in multiple sessions from multiple traffic sources. So when you think about it, when we're talking about sessions or traffic, we're actually double counting users or individual people. Now, that's obviously fine. Like, the reporting wouldn't work if we didn't do that. But when we really think hard about reporting on lead sources, we have to remember that it's the individual that converts, not the traffic. So rather than asking how many leads we got by traffic source, instead we should be thinking about which touch points contributed to each individual becoming a lead. We know that looking down the other end of the telescope and going user first with messaging is incredibly powerful, and it's exactly the same with data. When we say attribution, we're talking traffic, and then when we say contribution, really we're thinking about the user.
Right, that got deep. So I think it's a good moment to take a step back and zoom out a little bit. So I'm going to run through what we've talked about as a bit of a helicopter view. First up is the differences between CRM, your ad platforms, your Google Analytics, attribution software, and user-reported data. Each system tells its own version of the truth, and that's only based on the touch points that they can see. so we shouldn't treat any one of them as the complete version of the truth. Next up, we've got direct and influence conversions. Neither of them are perfect, but together they provide more of a holistic view. Knowing that the truth is somewhere in between them, we talked about how as marketers, we know that these customer journeys are these big and messy things, but for some reason we're obsessed with cutting them down into these simple, neat reports. We ran through how attribution software simplifies this data story, and why that's both a positive and a negative thing. And then finally, we introduced the concept of contribution, shifting the focus from lead volume by traffic source to touch points by user. So in the spirit of making this episode as useful as possible, let's pull out some takeaways. Don't get hung up on your reports not matching from different platforms. They gather data differently and they measure different things. Remember that each report is a data story from the customer journey. Each one tells a different segment or a different part of the story. It's never the whole thing. Use your CRM data for lead quality, close rates, and ROI. Use ad platform data to optimize campaigns. Know that one over-reports and the other under-reports, so the truth is somewhere in the middle. Get curious about contribution. Start to think about touch points by user, not lead volume by traffic source. It's much more difficult to measure, but the insights are so much more valuable. Present any insights as a story, not as a definitive truth. So rather than paid ads generated 50 leads, something like up to 50 people engaged with ads before becoming a lead. I know that data is a really dense topic, but it's often such a sticking point when it comes to talking about this with the board. If you can understand how your data is collected, you can paint a much clearer picture of your customer journey, which is one of the many riddles that you've got to solve for better performance marketing results.
And so let's finish on what I think is a really important point. If you're struggling with attribution, that's only natural. Just is a struggle because there's no perfect solutions and no complete truths. You have to report on it however's right for you. You're always going to be missing part of the story. The important part is knowing what your blind spots are.
If that famous quote was better the devil you know that you don't know, that would fit this situation perfectly.
Now, that's it for this episode. If you found it useful, please leave us a review and let us know what your best takeaway was. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover in a future episode, we'd love to hear it. Just head to webmarketeruk.com/topic and send us a message. We read every single one. Thanks so much for joining us today. Catch you on the next episode.